Hi and welcome to another monthly wrap up. So this will be April. So this is March's wrap up. God, what a month it's been. I'm losing track of days, times, months, everything. I forgot people's names. The lockdown is making me crazy. So March was an average month reading wise, and there were plenty of 3 stars that are just kind of all right books. So the stats of the books that I read in March are: I read 4 5 stars, 6 4 stars, 8 3 stars, 1 2 star and 1 1 star. And as usual, there was quite a range of genres in there. I read 3 non-fiction, 2 contemporary, 5 YA, 1 dystopian, 1 horror, 3 thrillers, 1 literary fiction, 2 fantasy, 1 sci-fi and 1 graphic novel that would probably fall under sci-fi or horror, I think. So I'll start off telling you about the 5 stars that I read. And the first one was actually an ARC that I received, and it's called The Wives by Taryn Fisher. I know that this was released a bit earlier in the US, but for UK it is quite a new release. And for me, that was a brilliant thriller. Basically it follows a woman who is part of a polygamous marriage, and there are 2 other wives, but she's never met those 2 other wives. She doesn't even know anything about them. And the husband uses nicknames, well, days of the week, to call his wives based on when he sees them, and he never wants them to meet. But Thursday, which is the main character that we follow, she manages to find out some information about one of the other wives, and then she goes up to, kind of just see what kind of person she is, what this other wife looks like. And she spots bruises that are quite suspicious and look to be evidence of domestic abuse. And this other wife is acting a little cagey when she talks about her husband. So that then kind of leads into her trying to investigate and find the 3rd wife and see if her husband is the man that she thinks he is and that she loves, or if he is some kind of horrible husband and that there's things she needs to be aware of with him. There's some really, really incredible twists in that book that I just didn't see them coming at all. I know some people have said they did, but I didn't at all. I thought it was a fantastic book. Kept me on my toes, and it really was like a page turner. I got through it quite fast, and yeah, that was really, really good for me. But the absolute standout book of the month by a million miles was a YA ARC that I received, and it was called And the Stars Were Burning Brightly by Danielle Joando. I think I've pronounced that right. I'm sorry if I haven't. Danielle is actually a local author. Where she lives and where the story is set is actually about 15 miles from me, and it was really, really nice to see like a really authentic northern UK setting and characters that are realistic. And basically there's a young boy called Nathan, and he finds his brother who has taken his own life. His brother is found hanging, and Nathan then, he really, really struggles to cope with everything that's happened. And his brother Al had actually tried to ring or message him just prior to ending his life, but Nathan was busy with his friends and he didn't answer. And then obviously there's like a huge amount of guilt there, and what ifs of, if I'd have answered the call, would he not have killed himself? Is it my fault because I ignored him when he was struggling? Things like that. And then he accidentally kind of meets one of Al's friends, Megan, and the two of them are so distraught, I guess, really, really struggling to come to terms with things, that they then try and find out why, because Al was a really great student. He had a promising art career ahead of him. He was just going to be so successful. People always said that he was going to do brilliant things. And then for him to, as far as they know, out of the blue, end his own life. They want to know why. There must be a reason for such a promising young person to end his own life. And it deals with lots and lots of very difficult subjects like bullying, especially cyberbullying, anxiety, confidence, depression, things like that, but definitely bullying. That is a huge theme through the whole book, and it's absolutely heart-wrenching. It really is. Each chapter alternates between Nathan and Megan, so we get to see their perspectives, but then also every chapter starts with a paragraph from Al, so we get to see like his mental state and his insights into things, and what was actually happening at the time for him, as opposed to what people thought was going on. So it's horrible to read because it's so realistic, and we know that there's people out there that are going through these things, that it is a real thing for them. It's not just a story that they read. And I was I was literally sobbing, absolutely snotty, messy, crying everywhere reading this. It was just, it really gets to you, and it's so incredibly well written. The characters are just, they're endearing. You want to just give them a big hug and tell them that everything's okay and it's not their fault. It's horrible, but it's wonderful, and I think everybody really should read this book. It's, especially teenagers, it's incredible. The next 5-star book that I read this month was A Long Walk to Water by Linda Sue Park. And this is a short story fiction, but it's based on a true story. It's set in Sudan, and we follow a young boy and a young girl in different time periods. The boy is in 1985-ish and then onwards, and the little girl is in 2008. They live in Sudan, and they're both going through very different but both very difficult hardships. The boy, on his timeline, there's the civil war going on, and then the girl is, we follow her through the difficulties of accessing clean water and getting water to the villages, and we follow them on these separate paths, and they do come together, but it's only right at the end. And the boy kind of, honestly, the situations that he has to live through, and considering these are based on a true story, then it's horrible. He survived through fleeing from soldiers who were just murdering and burning the village down and all that kind of stuff, and he walked hundreds of miles. He was practically starved. He's lived in the concentration camps. He's been kicked out of concentration camps when the government in another country decided to just shut them down. He's had to swim across rivers hoping that crocodiles weren't going to get him. All sorts, all these things that you just think, somebody just can't, they just can't live through that. Surely it's got to be made up. But there are people out there that are living through these things, and I think this book does an absolutely wonderful job of raising awareness of these kind of things, because it's so easy to sit in our little bubble in, the UK, US, wherever, and read, Fangirl and Confessions of a GP and whatever else. But actually there's people out there that are going through absolute horrific things. No, like, this isn't hundreds of years ago this is now. So I think that it just did a brilliant job of making that kind of information and that kind of story more accessible to people. And the last 5-star book that I read in March was Thunderhead by Neil Shusterman. I knew this was going to be 5-star. I read Scythe last month, the month before, and I absolutely loved it. Don't know why I hadn't got round to reading this series sooner, but it is amazing. I had hoped to completely finish the series in March, but I didn't. I only got Thunderhead read, but yeah, it was incredible. And actually, it was right at the end of the month that I read it, and I mean the last couple of days. So all I did was just crack straight on with the Toll because I could not wait any longer to see what was going to happen. But the Toll review is going to be in April's wrap-up. Fantastic. If you don't know what it's about, then please just go and have a look, because I cannot do it justice describing what it is. It's dystopian, it's YA, and it's incredible. And then a 4-star read for March was Annihilation by Jeff Vandermeer. Yeah, I did not know what to rate this book. If anybody has read it, you'll understand exactly what I mean when I say I got to the end, like I finished the last page, and I honestly could not have told you whether I really enjoyed it or not. It was just, it's a very bizarre book. It's very well written because the main character, whose point of view this whole book is, she's a scientist, and she's very clinical and very dry in the way she describes things. It's very professional and very straight down the line of how she talks about things going on. There's not a lot of emotion in how she thinks about things. So, and this book is written the whole way like that. So it's initially quite difficult to bond with her or feel a connection to the character, but I think that's how she's supposed to come across. All I can say is that it's set in like a really unusual setting of there's this area where people aren't supposed to go. It's completely fenced off. Weird things happen in the government keeps sending teams of scientists and various other professionals to go into this area to try and discover things. But the book never explains to you why or what they're looking for. In fact, even the characters don't know why they're there or what they're looking for. They're just told that they're supposed to look for something that stands out and to gather evidence of things that are happening there. So it's just really odd. Like they talk about how one of the previous expeditions of scientists who went in all committed mass suicide. Another previous expedition that went in, they all got out, but then they all died of cancer very quickly afterwards. There's other people who've managed to get out but have gone insane, things like that. So it's very odd. I will be carrying on the series at some point, but the way it left me feeling, it's not kind of left me desperate to go and read the rest of them, even though it was interesting, but in a weird way. I don't know. If you've read it, you'll know what I'm talking about. And then this one, Why Mummy Doesn't Give a F by Jill Sims. I knew this was going to be a good book. I've read the other 2 books in the series, and this is the latest instalment. I have a feeling this might be the last, because the children are older teenagers in this book. So it follows kind of like the trials and tribulations of being a mum of teenagers, and she's a single mum and trying to kind of have a life but deal with teenagers who are, you know, stropping and going out drinking and partying and things like that. And also about her trying to find love again for herself. And it's just a fun book that I think mums of teenagers would definitely relate to. And it's just an easy read. It's just light-hearted. And then I read Tokyo Zombie. I'm not going to even try and pronounce the author's name. I'd just destroy it. But I knew I was going to enjoy this just because, you know, it looked quite fun. Zombies, which I love. I definitely was not expecting it to be have any sexual content, but it does. It's a bit odd. There's a man having sex with a zombie. Yeah, it's a little weird in places, but it's I mean, it's a graphic novel, so I just kind of got through this within, you know, less than an hour, and it was really, it's just, I can't say anything really stood out about it. I just enjoyed it. It was just an easy read. And then I read Paradise Girl by Phil Featherstone. This is another ARC that was sent to me, but I think this is one where they sent out the ARCs after it's already published to get some more reviews and interest. So I think you can actually go and buy this already. It's, well, it's very, very eerily similar to what is happening at the moment. Basically, it's a dystopian where there's been a virus outbreak and it's killed the majority of the people in the country, or as far as we know on the planet. And 17-year-old Cheryl is the sole survivor as far as she's aware. All her family members have died. She's cared for them whilst they passed away. There was, you know, when she's gone into the village on the odd occasion, there's just dead bodies everywhere or people dying. And it starts off kind of gradual, and when I say this, you'll understand what I mean about it being eerily similar, in that there was kind of daily reports from the governments talking about what was happening, people needing to stay indoors, and then sporting events were done behind closed doors without audiences or without spectators, which is something that happened here in the UK at the beginning of this current pandemic. And it's a very, I would call it a slow burn book, as in there's no like major action or big events that we build up to. I think it's very realistic in that it shows this like a very gradual decline in Cheryl's mental health. And then these weird things start happening that she thinks are signs that there's somebody out there. So things like a gate to the property is left open when she knows that she's closed it and locked it, and then the chickens being let out of the coop and she knows that she'd locked them in. Just things like small things that, like, I guess it's kind of, it reminds me a bit of gaslighting, where she's not sure if it's actually her forgetting things or she's done them and somebody else has done it. So it's like a mental torture for her, really. And then it just kind of builds and builds through the book until the very end, but I can't tell you about the end because it's a twist. So yeah, it was actually a good one, but I think people need to be aware that it might be very triggering with what's going on at the moment in the world. And I read Positive by David Wellington. This is a dystopian. It's a zombie park, but it's not really about the zombies, it's more about the people. There's certain people who, if they get kind of scratched or bitten or whatever, they have this virus that can turn them into a zombie, and it can lie dormant in the bodies for up to, I think it's like 19 years or something. But so what the communities do is they mark them with a positive sign on the forehead, like a tattoo, and then they send them away to go and live in a kind of safe monitored zone that the US Army provide. And then if they haven't turned into a zombie by the end of this 19-year maximum kind of incubation period, they're allowed to go back to the families and back to the communities. And it follows a young boy. I say young, he's probably a teenager. It follows this teenager who does get scratched, or they think that he's got scratched. That I don't think they're 100% sure. And then he is then sent away to live in one of these communities, but it's not what it seems. And he ends up actually in some really terrible situations where people are trying to kill him. People are stealing his clothes, his food, everything. It was alright. It wasn't amazing, but yeah, it was a good story and I would carry it on, but I don't think there's anything standoutish about it really. And the last book that I rated 4 stars in March was called The Girl with 7 Names, and again, I'm just not going to try to pronounce the author's name. I'm really sorry, but I just wouldn't be able to. It follows the story of a young girl who grows up in North Korea, and she's basically living under this completely brutal totalitarian regime, and she's trying to escape, and we basically follow her through her life up until, you know, middle age, and the situation she ends up in. She manages to get to South Korea at one point. She also spends time in China, and then later on in America, I think. And it's about the things she has to do to escape. At one point she's a sex worker. She has to constantly keep changing her identity. That's why she ends up with 7 names. And her family, their lives are at risk if people find out that she's escaped from North Korea. And it's completely non-fiction. It's just a lot. Like, what this girl has gone through is insane. It's another one of those where you kind of think, that can't happen. It's just impossible for somebody to go through so much stuff. But actually, it's true story. This is this woman's life. And it is a really, really good story. It's a fantastic insight into life in North Korea and the people and how they're trying to just get by, basically. So I would say that if this is something that you wanted to know a little bit more about, then it's definitely something that will not only be interesting, but give you a lot of insight into the North Korean culture. And so now we are on to the 3-star books for this month, and the first one that I read is called The Silent House by Nell Pattison. This is a thriller, and it offers like a really unique kind of angle on things because it follows a profoundly deaf family who have gone to bed perfectly fine, and then the next morning they wake up and discover that their baby daughter has been killed in the night. And there's like all these creepy vibes about how an intruder can come into somebody's house who is deaf, and they can basically do whatever they want. They could create as much noise as they want. They can hurt people. They could steal things. And this family, or these deaf people, would not have any clue of what's going on until they wake up the next morning. And so we follow a main character called Paige, who grew up in a deaf family, but she is a hearing lady, and so she is able to communicate with sign language. So she is hired as an interpreter by the police in this case whenever they need to interview anybody or speak to them at the scene and things like that. Now, this lady Paige is already a big part of the local deaf community, so she knew the vast majority of people that kind of were brought into this story before this incident happened. And to me, it just kind of felt that the author used this interpreter as a way to introduce information about characters without having to build on it, or without having to go to much effort for the police to figure things out. Like, this interpreter just handed them the information they needed, or just handed them information about characters' backgrounds and things like that. And it just ended up being a bit of a disappointment, to be honest. I honestly thought that this was going to be a really creepy, atmospheric page turner, you know, 5-star read, and it just wasn't. It just kind of fell a bit flat. It just didn't deliver what it promised for me. It felt like a really bog standard, average, not very well written thriller, but with the death issue kind of just thrown in there to make like a selling point. I don't know. And the last arc that I read this month was called A Life Redefined by Tracy Hewitt Mayer. Again, just another 3-star read for me. We follow, I think she's about 17 or 18, a young girl called Rowan. And when she was younger, she was about 10 years old, I think. Just a very simple accident, mistake kind of thing that she did as a child, that any child might have made that mistake. It led to the death of her baby brother. And since then, she's felt like she's been kind of not cast out of the family, but she's just kind of there. They don't really interact very much with her. They don't show her any love, any support. In fact, her younger sister is quite nasty towards her. I think it's a stepfather. He's not nice to the whole family, to be honest. And the mum is suffering from depression and alcoholism. It's a very sad story. You know, there's a lot going on. It does deal with things such as domestic violence, depression, alcoholism, rape, sexual assault, child death. There's possibly more. It's got a lot of big issues in this book and a lot of triggers, but it just felt like they weren't kind of explored properly. There was just too much going on, it felt like. And the answer to all this girl's problems, to her whole life being crap, was a boy. And he liked her, and he helped her find some self-confidence, and he rescued her from this horrible situation and took her to live with his family, and everything was good. It just, I don't know, it just wasn't realistic enough for me. And I read Hidden Figures this month as well, and this may be a very unpopular opinion, but for me, I think this was just average. And I understand that it's an important topic, and I understand that it's very important, especially for Black history, and it's not the topic that I didn't enjoy. It was more the way that it was written and the presentation of things. It felt very fact heavy, quite impersonal, I would say. I have a big thing about non-fiction being accessible to people, in that lots of people would assume non-fiction is quite boring, quite dry. You know, you're just learning as opposed to enjoying the book. And this fell into that category, I felt anyway. It tells the story of the Black female mathematicians that worked at NASA, and they were fundamental to a lot of the big projects that were going on in NASA at the time. However, they were quite nameless on reports and, in the press. They were just not seen. They were behind the scenes, and it was kept quiet that they were there. And obviously I understand that discussing that and bringing all this information out into the open is very important. It's just, I felt like it could have been a little more personal, a little more about the women themselves, as opposed to this person came from this background, she did this, she went there, end of. It just was, it felt like it could have been a bit more of a story as opposed to the facts. And I'm very aware that I've kept you for quite some time already, and I know that discussing 20 books in detail would take some time, so I'll just very, very quickly now mention the other books that I read this month that were rated 3-star, 2-star, 1-star. And the first one was The June Boys by Courtney C. Stevens. I think this is based on a true story, but it's presented as a thriller, and a serial child abductor. He he abducts a boy every June and then keeps him for a year and then releases him and then abducts another one. Hence, you know, the June boys. But it just, it just wasn't that entertaining. And that sounds horrible when it's based on a true story of child abduction. But I think it either needed to be non-fiction and tell, you know, true crime kind of thing, or it needs to just be fiction, and it just didn't quite work very well written as like this middle ground. And I read a book called School for Spirits by Aaron Lewis. This was on Kindle Unlimited. I thought I'd give it a try. It's aimed at teenagers. A young girl, she is killed in an accident, and she ends up in the spirit world. She has to learn how to be a spirit guide for people back on Earth, and it was very cheesy, very predictable, relied heavily on really cliche tropes such as, you know, like a love triangle and liking the bad boy and things like that. But it was also quite I understand it's unrealistic, but it was unrealistic even more in that the girl just didn't seem to be bothered that she'd been killed and that her family would miss her. She very rarely got upset. She was more, you know, focused on these boys that she liked in the spirit world. It just was a bit, I don't know. Yeah. And I listened to the audiobook of My Life Among the Underdogs by Tia Torres. It's a memoir of this lady and how she came about working within the TV and film sector training animals, and also how she came about opening up a kind of rescue for certain types of dogs and animals, such as the ones that people kind of view quite negatively, like pit bulls, these weird wolf hybrid dogs. And it's the first book I've ever read that's along those lines, that's kind of animal focused. And I have to say, it was all right. I didn't absolutely love it. It was just basically she's chosen a certain number of standout dogs that she has rescued or owned in her lifetime, and the kind of lessons or opportunities that dog gave her. I think if you are a massive dog lover, then and you like reading about animal stories, then you would probably enjoy this. But for me, it just wasn't a hit really. And because I'm such a professional, I've just knocked my phone over. So we've now got a completely different angle. Anyway, so I also read Autobiography by Christina Lauren this month, and I'm probably not going to be very popular with this opinion, but for me it was just average. It follows a boy who's openly gay, and he is living in a state where it's quite more, you know, there's a huge Mormon population, and being gay is not really accepted. And he starts falling for somebody who is his teaching assistant, but who is also Mormon, and it kind of then follows this journey of this teaching assistant discovering his sexuality and coming out and things like that. I feel awful saying it, but it just wasn't massively entertaining. It was just really predictable, really cliche. And the last 3-star book that I read this month was called The Siren by Kira Cass. This follows mermaids or sirens, whatever you want to call them, and it's just a really, really cheesy, cliched story about a forbidden love, basically. So one of the sirens, she meets a guy and starts to fall for him, but she can't speak, because if any of these sirens speak and the humans hear them, they will fall under the spell and go and kill themselves in the nearest water. So she can't ever speak to him, and she's not supposed to fall in love with him, because then if she never ages, how would she explain that to him? So it's just this forbidden love, basically. It is an easy read. it's just not my type of thing, and I definitely won't be rushing out to read any more of her books anytime soon. The 1 2-star that I read this month was Interworld by Neil Gaiman, and that again is probably not a popular opinion. I know lots of people love Neil Gaiman's books. I struggle with them. I think I've read 4 now, and the only one that I enjoyed was the Graveyard Book. They're just a bit too fantasy for me. They're just a little bit too out there. I listened to Interworld rather than reading it, and I just got lost, to be honest. By the end of it, I could kind of tell you the gist, which is that a boy enters an alternate universe and he's fighting evil and then comes back to his own universe. That's about all I know. I just didn't get it. I couldn't follow it. It was a bit too chaotic for me. And then the 1-star book I read this month is The Wasp Factory by Ian Banks. This is a horror, and it sounds really weird and messed up, and I usually enjoy books like that, but it's just... no words. I just didn't get it at all. There's a young boy who goes around murdering his relatives, and then he justifies them and hides, and nobody really gets that he's murdering them. They think it's all been accidents. He kind of sets up situations where these relatives would be killed, and it looks like an accident, but it's actually him setting things up, such as putting a poisonous snake into the fake leg of his cousin, I think it was, and then the cousin puts the fake leg on after waking up, and the snake bites him and he dies. And it's just really bizarre. It's set in Scotland, and he's living on this kind of remote place. He's not supposed to interact with very many people. It's just odd. I didn't get it. And yeah, I won't be rushing to read any more of that author. And that's everything. So that was 20 books that I read in March. It wasn't an amazing month. The few 5 stars that I read, especially And the Stars Were Burning Brightly, that one just blew me out of the water. And they really, really made the month a hit, but the others were just a bit of a drag. So I'm hoping that April is going to be much better for me, and that we continue to do okay in this very weird situation we're all in at the moment. So thank you for watching. Thank you for putting up to me rambling on. And I will see you all soon. Stay safe.